Hi, my name is Michael Peterson. I'm a singer-songwriter, recording artist, entertainer, and inspirational speaker. And you are listening to Talking Blues.
So, Michael, if I'm not mistaken, your grandmother had a lot of influence on you and your love of music.
Yeah, clearly.
Tell me, when did the guitar playing start? Or is that the first instrument?
Uh, the guitar playing started on any kind of recognizable, serious level my freshman year in college. My my stepdad had committed suicide right at the end of my senior year of high school, and I picked up an album by an artist named Dan Fogelberg called Netherlands, and it so profoundly impacted me emotionally that about halfway through my freshman year of college, they had a kind of a music coffee house on campus called The Cave at Pacific Lutheran University. And they had open mic nights. And I had a buddy of mine that was selling a guitar. It was a pretty nice guitar, and I didn't have a good guitar. And this Dan Fogelberg record had moved me so deeply. I found myself beginning to write words, write my feelings about what I was experiencing in the wake of my dad's suicide. And this Fogelberg record just became a touchstone to stir up. And I realized how powerful music would be, and it was for me. And I just thought, I have to write. I have to write down what I'm feeling. So I bought a guitar from a buddy of mine, and I went to town. I just started learning how to play. I never took lessons, in terms of paying somebody for a lesson, but I had a million teachers. You know,
How easy did, I mean, that's a, one, you have to learn the instrument. Two, you have to learn how to write a song. I mean, those are two major things.
yeah.
How easy did that come to you?
Um, I took guitar lessons actually from a woman that I went to church with. She had me doing some work on her farm and her ranch, and she in exchange for that gave me guitar lessons. So I didn't pay for guitar lessons, but I had some basics. Like I knew the basic chords and things like that. But I had a very inexpensive, cheap guitar. It was hard to play, not much fun. So when I got to college my freshman year and I got a real guitar, I had a sense already of kind of what the basic chords were. And as a kid growing up, everybody looks for some place to fit in and belong. And a lot of things did not come easy to me. I had a really difficult time processing things visually, um, because my brain dominance hadn't kind of matured at the same rate as a lot of other kids. So math, reading, stuff that was sort of rote, I had a difficult time with. But for whatever reason, music just really came natural to me. So that's the place that I drifted to. So I just immersed myself in music. So I think, in that sense, when I became a freshman in college and started wanting to write songs, and I was writing poetry that was reflecting my angst and my loss, I had a lot to pull from in terms of my time I had spent with everyone from the Beatles forward. I mean, everyone that I could put my hands on from the Beatles forward was fodder for me of my sense of what I felt musically and how I wanted to express it. So, it was sort of duct tape and hammer. you know, like I don't really know what I'm doing, but I got a hammer and I got some duct tape. Let me see if I can build something. So that's how I started. And I would go down to the open mic on campus and try to play some songs, but I would be so nervous I could hardly play or remember what I was trying to do. And that's just where it started. And it honestly, I would have been 18. I'm 65 now, and I can tell you that the one constant in my journey from 18 to now is that I've never lost a passion for that pursuit, whether I was getting paid or not, whether they liked it or not. Almost every day I'd wake up and think about a song. And it's just been a consuming passion for me. So over the years, I started recognizing it, I think, as my vocation. There were times when it was my profession and my vocation, and then there's been times when I wasn't able to make a living doing it, so it was just my vocation, with my calling. and I honored that as best as I could every step of the way. And I still, like, I remember hearing stories about Chet Atkins, how he, easily considered by many people one of the greatest guitar players in the world, but he took guitar lessons until very, very, very late in his life when he physically couldn't do it anymore. And I was so inspired by that. I had lunch with him one day and he told me that, and I was like, wow, really? Like, you take guitar lessons? And so I just realized I wanted to be a lifelong learner, and I'm still learning stuff about my artistry and guitar playing. But it all started with just a desire and a sense of calling, like I had to do this.
Well, the other thing that you do, and you started very early, was I don't know if it's called motivational speaking, but you spoke to kids.
Yeah.
Tell me about how that happened. And I'm curious as to how that informed who you are as a musician.
Hmm. Well, so when I was 15, my birth father was murdered by his business partner. And when I was 17, my adopted dad, who my mom had married when I was about two, he committed suicide. And I was there at the house and found him when the police got there.
Wow.
And that's trauma. At the time I didn't know it. I'm 18. What do I know? I mean, I'm not even 18. I'm 17. I'm 15. I'm 17. I don't know what. I didn't even know what to do. I didn't even know what I'm supposed to feel. I remember going to school the weekend after my father was murdered. Nobody at school knew my dad. He didn't live in the town I lived in. I went back to school. Like, who am I going to tell? Like, how do you process this stuff? So, those are traumatic things that happen in people's lives. I grew up in a family where there was really good times, like there is in many families, but like in many families as well, there were difficult times emotionally. And a lot of stuff to deal with. And if you combine that with the challenges I was having from a learning standpoint, the combination of the emotional challenges and the learning challenges, there was a lot going on inside of me emotionally, right? So when I got in my early 20s, sort of late college, yeah, late college, maybe my junior, senior year, somebody asked me, they'd heard me tell a little bit of my story, and they asked me, would I come and speak to some students and share a little bit of my story? And I was like, no, why would I do that? Like, why would I do that? And they said, well, because it might help somebody else. And I thought, well, how's anybody going to be helped by me telling what I've been through? But I thought, this guy kept pestering me. I just thought, okay, I'll do it. And at the end of it, like, first of all, I didn't know really how to do that. So I said to him, I don't know how to do this. He said, just tell your story. So I did. So when I got done, there were some students that came up to me and were crying and thanking me for sharing my story. And I just thought, what is this? Like, and you know, then I got asked to do it again because somebody that was there told another group. And so little by little, I started getting asked to do these things just to come and tell my story. And I just started to realize, like, there's some kind of redemptive value in saying what you've been through and that you're still alive and that you have found some healing and that you're finding a way forward. There's something in that that gives other people some hope. Kind of sense like, well, if he's okay, maybe I'll be okay. And so I just started saying yes when those opportunities came, and that really put me down. It's been a lifelong journey of feeling like if I had anything to share, it would be sort of wrapped up. Actually, I'll tell you an interesting story. To me, it's interesting. For anybody that's listening, that's thinking about communications, like what do you want to speak to other people? So I was talking to a mentor of mine. I was 21, maybe 22, and I said, "Hey, what maybe I could speak at the church sometime." And he said, "What would you speak about, and who would you speak to?" And I said, "I don't know. I'll speak to everybody, and I'll speak about this and that and this and that and this and that." And he said, "Nah." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Do me a favor." And he reached in his wallet and he pulled out a business card. It was his business card. And he turned it over and he said, "You see that blank space on the back of that card?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You go away now and don't come back until you can write in one sentence on the back of my business card the one thing that you think is the most important thing that you have to share with other people and who those people might be." So weeks went by and I thought about it a lot. And I wrote down a sentence. And it was so clear and it was such a great exercise to help me focus that I still remember to this day. And the sentence was, "I am offering a conversation that will give hope to people that are in the wake of adversity and trauma."
How did you find hope? What going through what you did?
I think you find it a breadcrumb at a time. You know, um, I remember, after my dad died, my stepdad, my adopted dad, I was my stepdad for a while, became my adopted dad. Maybe a week after he was buried, there was a knock on our door. I'm 17, just buried my dad. I'm angry. I'm a lot of things. I don't even know that I could even articulate what I felt at that point. But there's a knock on the door, and I open up the door, and I see a very, because when you're 17, everyone's elderly. So I see a very elderly man at the door, which now I look probably more like him than I would like to imagine. But um, and I recognize I've seen his portrait on the wall at the church. I've never met him, and he's a retired pastor from our church. And I said to him immediately as he's standing in the doorway, "I'll go get my mom." And he said, "No, I came to see you." And I was stunned. Like, what? I said, "Oh, well, come on in." So he said, "I had a dream last night. And in the dream, I was told that I was supposed to come see you." And I said, "Well, what was the dream?" Of course, I'm abbreviating our conversation, but I said, "What was the dream?" And he said, in the dream, I dreamed that I came to see you and that I was supposed to share a passage from the Bible with you. And that's why I came."
Wow.
So I'm like, "Okay, what was it?" And he said, it's a scripture from the book of Proverbs. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart." It's Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. He says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, but in everything you do, acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight." So this happens, and he says goodbye, and I'm left there going like, I'm not a deeply religious person at that point in my life. And I'm just thinking, that was odd. And then I remembered, huh, I'm sitting in the 2 days, 3 days after my dad's dead, his body's in the funeral home. I'm flashing back now after this pastor leaves. I'm flashing back to sitting in my football coach's truck in front of the funeral home after I've just viewed my dad's body. I went by myself. He drove me because I didn't have a car. And he was one person in my life that I had a sense of trust with. So now I'm back in his car. I've just seen my dad's dead body. And I'm just sitting in his cabin and I'm just starting to cry. And he says to me, "Do you want to talk about anything?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what to do." And he said, "Well, what do you mean you don't know what to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to go off to college and play football. But then that means my mom will be here by herself. What do I do? I could take a scholarship here and go to community college, or I could go away." And he said, "Well, have you ever prayed about it?" I thought, and suddenly I remembered, probably in January, my dad died in May, but in January of that year, I had gotten a letter from the university I wanted to play football at saying that I'd been denied admission because my grades were so poor. And my dad did something that I'm standing in the kitchen with him. I'm reading the letter and I'm obviously upset. And my dad, who I don't recall ever before then praying with him or him ever asking me to pray with him, but he said to me, "Hey, we should pray about it." I thought. So he grabs my hand and he basically prays his prayer and he says, um, God, whatever it is that Michael's supposed to do, if he's supposed to go to college at Pacific Lutheran, will you work it out so that they will say yes for him going? And if it's not to be, then we'll know that that's your will. So I'm telling this to my football coach sitting in the cab of his truck, and he says, "Have you ever prayed about it?" And suddenly I realized, oh yeah, I have prayed about it. And he said, "Well, what did you pray?" And I said, "Well, my dad prayed that if I was supposed to go left instead of right, that it would work out that way." And then he says to me, this all flashes back to this pastor showing up at my house and giving me this scripture verse. My coach says to me, "Well," he says, uh, "I have a belief that if you were supposed to go right, but you went left instead, as if there was a right way and a wrong way." He said, "I think God has a way of taking the left turns and making them into right turns,
Hmm.
kind of straightening out your road. Like if you got off on the wrong path, somehow that'll all get worked out." So now I'm, back to the story about the pastor at my church who comes to my house and says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding, but everything you do, acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight." So, did I have anything that gave me hope? Even in the midst of my grieving, there was something about all of that that was so magical and so undeniable, mystical, and so connected that I just had a sense of like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. And there was some hope in that for me.
So at around the same time, you also find hope in music,
Yeah.
and you said it came relatively easy to you.
Yeah, I mean, singing, I could always sing. I have my earliest childhood memories are musical memories. The Beatles at age 5, age 6. A just profound attraction to music. Um, and, singing in another story I can tell you. I was about 12 years old. I'm sitting in that same church I told you that Lutheran pastor came from. And I'm in the back pew of this church, Richland Lutheran Church. And I'm supposed to be in Sunday school, but I've snuck out of class because I didn't, for whatever reason, didn't want to be in there. I don't remember exactly why. But I'm sitting by myself in the back pew. And, if you've been to church like that, there's these moments where somebody who's ever up front will say, "Please turn in your hymnals to page 425 or whatever, and we'll sing this hymn together." And I remember, clear as I'm talking to you, that moment happened. And I thought to myself, I don't want to sing. And something inside of me, a knowing, not an audible voice, but something inside of me said, "If you'll sing for me, I'll let you sing for the world." I mean, it's a strange thing to hear it as 11 or 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess there's not much more to the story than I said, Okay," and I picked up and opened up the hymnal and sang, "A mighty fortress is our God," or whatever the hymn was. I don't remember the hymn, but these are substantial moments in my life where I just went, well, "That was strange," and then look how my life has turned out. So some of these things you recognize through a certain lens when you look back, and you have to be careful with that kind of stuff, I think, sometimes, because there's a quote that says, "Fate is often the name we give to our mistakes."
Hmm.
We just tend to look at things through the lens of, you know, what our story becomes about it. But I can't deny that there were significant emotional experiences in my life that when I look back, I go, oh, that makes sense, you
What
know?
I find interesting is, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, I got the impression that you wanted to be more of a songwriter than a performer.
Um, Probably the best way I can explain that, I guess, again, in retrospect, is from a quote from, um, oh, what was her name of the Grand Minnie Pearl from the Grand Ole Opry. A lot of people remember Minnie Pearl.
Yeah.
And she said there's two kinds of performers. There's the performers who walk on the stage and say, "Here I am." And then there's the performers that walk on the stage and say, "There you are." And I think that appealed to me so much because I wasn't the guy that was just desperate to get in front of people so I could say, "Here I am." Really, my whole journey really as a performer has been more about the desire to somehow connect with people in something that becomes a shared experience, a dialogue, to where we all leave the moment saying, wow, look at the cool things that happened tonight, the funny things that happened. Because I just have found more joy and more fun over the years by seeing performances more in the light of like a shared community experience as opposed to, hey, you know, come, listen to my music. And I think there's a lot of truth to the idea that by and large, people go to concerts and events like that, not necessarily to hear you sing your songs as much as they come to have their own personal experience with your music. It's not just about their music. It's about what the person they come to listen to. It's about what they hope that music makes them feel and how they connect to it. And I know there's going to be exceptions to that, but generally speaking, to try to answer your question, I never was the guy that said, "Hey, I need to be seen. I need to get on the stage so everyone can see me." I just it wasn't me, and my journey started with songwriting, and then became like, well, no one else is going to sing these songs. I guess I have to. Well, I like singing. Okay, let me try that. And then combine that with, I'm kind of expressing probably this to you for the first time. I'm putting this together, but you start connecting that with when you share your story with people and how it seems to make a difference in their life. And I want to bring hope to other people, and like hope was brought to me. So how can I do that if I don't get up and sing and tell my story? So I think over time I just became a performer. I remember when I got signed at Warner Brothers. I'm in Nashville, and my A&R person at Warner Brothers, I wasn't signed there yet, but I was getting ready to look at that possibility. And she suggested that I get a band and we go do a showcase and kind of do all of that. And I just said to her, no. And she looked at me a little stunned because pretty much if you're trying to get a record deal, you do whatever they tell you to do. And when I said no, she said, well, why not? And I said, I've never really done that. I don't know how to drive that car. She said, well, how are we going to show your music? I said, well, you know what I've done a lot of? I've played hundreds and hundreds of times with just my guitar to groups of people where I try to bring some laughter and tell a story. And that's what I know I can do that. Let's do that. So I did that. That was my showcase at Warner Brothers, and I ended up getting signed. And one of the things that she said to me she said it was the hallmark, she said, for her was my ability to communicate with people somehow was my strength, and they wanted to build on my strengths. They loved my songwriting, they liked my singing, they liked the team of people I'd been able to put around me. But the most thing she thought was most intriguing and unique was that I had an ability to communicate and engage people. That I think was born from my speaking, kind of like you
Right.
said.
But I wonder, like, when you first went to Nashville, and I know you went on a part time basis, but when you first went
Yeah.
there, I mean, I got the impression that you went there because you wanted to get a publishing deal to write
Well,
songs.
yeah, that was the primary thing because That's what I thought I could do. You know, I didn't necessarily say I'm going to go to Nashville and be a star. But when I got signed my publishing deal at Warner Chappell, they said to me, "We think you should sing these songs." And I said, "Really?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay."
But
You know, so I got signed to Warner Chappell, and within a year, I think within a year I have to go back and check for sure, but within a year I think I had my record deal at Warner Reprise. And within 6 months of that, my first single hit number 3 on the Billboard chart. So I mean, I went from a guy, you know, that had never fronted a band to now I've got a hit record and I need to go on the road. This was a lot to learn.
I wonder though, because before that, many years before that, you actually had a hit
Yeah,
single with a contemporary Christian song or a gospel band
yeah. As a
as a
writer,
writer.
yeah, I wasn't the singer. Yeah.
What was that experience like to actually have a hit single under your name?
Well, it was interesting because the song, for me, the song was 10 years old. And it was a song that I had played for a lot of people and had gotten, you know, polite applause is a nice way to say it, I guess. You know, your friends have to like your songs or the beer stays in the refrigerator, right? So, you know, you have a lot. If you write a lot of songs, I was trying to write 20 songs a year if I could. So 10 years, that's a lot of songs. And, you know, I, I guess looking back, I think that was a pivotal moment for me because if I recall correctly, I had decided that maybe this music thing wasn't going to work out for me, and I went and applied for a job with the Seattle Police Department, and I had passed the physical exam. I get mixed up on this sometimes, but there's a physical and a written exam. I passed one of them, and I was getting ready to do the next, and thinking maybe I'd be a dare officer. I'd go work in schools and work with kids, you know. Um, And I got a phone call one day from a guy from a publishing company called Gaither Music Publishing Company out of Indiana. And for those who are listening, Bill Gaither was, you know, arguably the most successful gospel music publisher during his era. So I'm like, well, that's interesting. What do they want? So I call them back, and they said somehow or other they have gotten this song of mine called "Taking Your Love for Granted," and the Imperials. Like I said, the Imperials, yeah, the Imperials. Like, you know, 7 Dove Awards, 4 Grammys, million selling gospel quartet. They've gotten the song and they want to record it. I'm like, of course. I said yes. But I asked him, I said, how did you get this song? And he said, I don't know. I don't really know the story. I'm just calling to get the paperwork done. So, so I come to find out that one of my co-writers and a guy that had produced some recordings on me for my cassettes that I would sell at these church camps that I would do, right? He ended up being a guitar player for Denise Williams. And Denise was on tour with the Imperials. So he got to meet the Imperials and he gave them the cassette that had my songs on it because my cassette, but it were songs, he was pitching his own songs that were songs he'd co written with me on the record. So they picked Taking Your Love for Granted. They recorded it. 6 months later, I mean, I'm on the verge of just quitting the whole thing, thinking, well, maybe I can't make a living doing this. 6 months later, it becomes the first single. It goes to number one. And I draw a life lesson from that, which I'll often share this story with people is, wow, here I was thinking that I didn't know how to write a hit song. And a song I'd written 10 years ago goes to number one. And I realized, like a little voice said inside of me, hey, you've been a hit songwriter for 10 years. You just didn't know it.
Right.
Right? And so I oftentimes when I share that story, I share it because I'm trying to offer encouragement and hope to who's ever listening to say this. Whatever your profession is, whatever your passion is, it's tempting. And most often what we do is we try to measure where we are on the road by other people's opinions and feedback. And when it comes to creativity, you can get pretty discouraged because for any number of reasons, you know, might not be getting that feedback that encourages you. But you may have already written your first number one song. You just don't know it yet. You may have already done your best work. You painted your best portrait that you've ever painted, your best book that you ever wrote, your best poem you ever created. You know, um, you just don't know it yet because it's not clear yet. And most of the songs in my catalog that have been eventually recorded by other artists are songs that are a decade old or more. And some of the songs that I would go to Nashville and pitch my songs to publishers, that they'd say no, no unsolicited material accepted. You know, I went to Nashville. Then after that, years later, I got a record deal. I had some hit records, and I just went back to see some of those publishers. They didn't remember that I had been there before I had hits, but they saw me differently now. They were like, "Oh yeah, Michael Peterson's got hits now, so he's going to come in and see me." So I would go play them some songs, the same songs they passed on before, and they would say, "Oh yeah, those are great." And what I realized is perception is a lot about what's happening in real time. It's not that they were wrong then or right now. It's not that I was trying to play a fast one on them. But I understood in that moment that they were seeing me differently, so they were hearing my music differently. And when you go in to play a song for someone, you don't know what's going on in their life. Maybe their wife has just left them. Maybe their kid's in the hospital. Maybe they got a million other things on their mind and they just missed it. Chet Atkins, it was said, had a wall in his office that was covered with sheet music. And one day somebody asked him, what are all those songs? Are all those the hits that you produced? And he said, no, those are all the songs that became hits that I passed on.
Hmm.
He said, I keep that wall there to remind me nobody knows everything.
Okay, so if we go back to the point where you get the record deal, you release your first album, and it just
Yeah,
turns out hit after hit, like five hit
yeah.
songs or whatever. And you,
We have five top 20, five top 30 singles.
how are you
Yeah.
feeling as an artist yourself? I don't know if there's a distinction between you as a songwriter and you as a performing artist, but how are you feeling about either one of those roles at that point?
Well, you suddenly, you know, I always had something inside of me that said I was good, but you don't get a lot of positive feedback, so you start to question it.
Where do you think that thing inside of you came from? I mean, you said you had trouble at school,
Yeah.
not a great home life, but where's that belief come from? You think?
That I thought I was good?
Yeah, that
Well,
confidence.
maybe I'll say it differently. Instead of saying I thought I was good, I'll say this is probably more accurate. I liked what I was doing. I liked it, you know, and so if you go around for a lot of years with your art and for all intents and purposes, you're one of the few people that like it, you know. So suddenly, when a lot of people like it, there's something inside of you that sort of can can start to tell yourself the story that you've been discovered. And I'm not saying that there's not truth to that, but um, that sort of buys into that idea, like uh, of giving so much weight on other people's opinions, you know, and boy, you're right there. You're right there in the middle of it. I mean, I haven't talked about this stuff much or thought about it much, so I have to. You have to weigh some of my comments as being sort of in real time, but you know, you just suddenly you're being lauded a lot, and you're getting a lot of positive feedback, and a lot of people are saying a lot of incredibly nice things about you and about your talent, and it's kind of overwhelming, you know. But I think being a little older at that time that happened to me, I was 36 when that happened. So I think it might be different if you're 22.
Hmm.
I'm a little further down the road. My brain's finally fully online, in terms of brain maturity, and I'm a little older, so I've some experience with things, and I think that allowed me to to just stay in the saddle and say, I can't think too much about all that stuff. I have another song to write. I have another show to play. I have another thing to learn. And I really stayed pretty focused through all of that. But, when I stepped back and went, wow, what does this mean? What's it going to mean? Where's it going to go? What's going to happen?
I mean, I just wonder about the pressure that becomes comes to you when you have your first solo album and you have that many hits. All of a sudden, I would expect that they're expecting a lot of hits on the second and a lot of hits on the third.
Oh,
Did
yeah.
you feel that pressure, or did you not
Yeah.
think that way?
I focused on writing songs. And I had the out because of the first album. They say one of the things that marketing people will say is, if your first hit sounded like the color blue, to use a metaphor, then it's smart if you have a bunch of other songs that sort of sound like that same color, so that people start to recognize your sound,
Right.
because that's going to be your brand and that's how you go there. Well, my first three singles, which were all top 10 Billboard hits, a one, a three, and a seven, um, Drinks for a Still Lie, which doesn't sound anything like From Here to Eternity, which doesn't sound anything like Too Good to Be True. The only thing that was similar about the three was my voice and the production team. So, you know, that was not something people would have recommended, but I said, these are my songs, let's make a record. It took off the way that it did. And because that worked, as I headed into the second record, I just trusted to following my muse. Like, these are songs I'm writing. These are the songs I really like. Let's go make another record. So we did.
Okay, so I've asked this question many times. I'm not sure if I've ever received the answer that I'm hoping for, but what is a hit song to you? You've had a few. Is it just simply a great song? Is it what goes behind the song? Is it the machine that works behind pushing that song? How do you view a hit song?
Okay, how I view a hit song um, is that you can't write a hit song. You can write songs that you think might sound like hits, and the things that would cause people to say that sounds like a hit have to do with memorability, universal topic, um, something that's socially or emotionally going to be really resonating with a lot of people. I remember a buddy of mine said to me one time, he said, if you want to be a superstar as a songwriter or as an artist, then write or sing songs that make you a spokesperson for millions of people.
Hmm.
And that's one of the best answers I ever thought what a hit song is. He said a hit song is a song that makes whoever sings it or whoever writes it a spokesperson for millions of people. And over the years, I've started to say that a little bit differently. I start to ask the question when I start to write a song, I'll ask myself this question: is this title t-shirt worthy? Will millions of people want to wear this on a t-shirt or a bumper sticker? Like, is it have that kind of attraction, resonance, and something that people identify with? So that being said, I think those are the kinds of things that in the writing stage you look at and say, that sounds like a hit. A melody that's memorable, that I find myself just having an earworm with, a title that's engaging and either funny or deeply impacting, but something that people would wear on a t-shirt, that millions of people would say, yeah, that's me. Then I think there's the other part of the answer to the question, which is what, you can write what you think is a hit, but what makes a hit is the artist, the record company, the timing. And there are countless numbers of examples of different ways that people get hit records. Over the last 2 years, I think maybe 3 years ago, there was a guy you may remember here in the States who shot a video of himself standing in the woods in Virginia.
Yeah.
And he sang a song called Rich Men North of Richmond. No record company, nobody in the music scene knew who he was. Bang.
Blew up.
becomes a phenomenon, right? Um, you know, so what makes a hit song? Well, um, timing, the right person in the right place, the right time, in the right spot in history with the right message. Uh, and there's not a lot you can do to contrive that. Like that was just a guy making a song on his camera saying, I want to share some things with some people, you know. Um, there's a lot of albums that we've all listened to over the years that had songs on them that could have been hits, but they didn't become a hit because the record company said, nope, two singles off an album is enough. We need to move to the next album. And so, you pick up any George Strait record, and there's going to be three or four songs on there that could have been hits, but never were hits because they never were put out as singles. Because the marketing plan was to all new is always attractive, right? So let's have something new all the time. And so you're always putting out new records, something new, something new. So a lot of great songs sitting in publishing company vaults and record company vaults that could have been hits. Or you may have an artist that made a great record, and for whatever reason, they fell out of favor with their label, and the label never put the money behind it. So they never had a hit. So I don't know if you can say, definitively what makes a hit song. I think it's a lot of things, but those are the ways that I tend to look at it in terms of like the songwriting piece, and then there's the business side of
Okay,
it.
so knowing that,
There's stories about Randy Travis. Randy Travis put out a song. I don't remember the name of the song. I'd have to go back and look. But Randy Travis put out a song that didn't do well, like one of his first singles, and then didn't do really well. And then they came with another single, and the next single was explosive, and the third single was explosive. And then they re-released what the first single was. It hadn't done very well, and it became a giant hit.
right?
So it's just, who knows?
Okay, so knowing all that, and I don't know if you had figured all that out when you released your first
No,
album.
no,
Okay,
not,
so
not at
but
all.
with the success of the first album and all this hit singles,
Yeah.
does that change you as a writer? Do you now think I need to write more hits, or are you still able to think I just need to write good songs?
Early in my journey, I had an experience that, again, in retrospect, was cornerstone for me. So I'd gotten signed at Warner Chappell as a staff writer. I didn't have a record deal yet. And I was able, because there was a bit of a buzz going on about around what was happening with me. So some of the more successful songwriters in town were reaching out to me and asking if they could write with me. Because songwriters are trying to get songs on record, so they're going to try to line up with whoever the record company new artists are, see if they can get on the record. So there's a guy named Craig Wiseman, and I showed up at Craig's, and Craig, is one of the greatest prolific hit songwriters in Nashville history. Um, like he wrote "Just to See You Smile," he wrote "Live Like You Were Dying." I mean, the list is endless of what this guy wrote. So I showed up at this writing appointment, and I'm pretty keen at that point on trying to write hit songs because I've got a publishing deal and I want to make it work. So I walk into his office, and one of the first things he says to me is, "Today," and this is a guy that I hold in high esteem, and he says, "Today we're going to forget about trying to write a hit." What? I'm thinking to myself, what? I said, well, I didn't even know if I said anything. I'm stood there with a blank look on my face. He said, what I want to write with you is just something real. You got anything real? Okay. So I'm standing there. It's all taking place in a minute. And I have a notebook with me that been carrying around for a very long time that I wrote stuff in. So I flip open the notebook. I look and I find a page. And I see this page and I see this snippet of text that I wrote. It says, as a child, I was told that I was destined to be nothing. Growing wild as I got older, I fulfilled what had been said. Hiding ignorance and fear, I prayed that no one saw me bluffing. But I was laying the foundation for a future I would dread. And then I looked up at him and I said, is that real enough? He said, that'll work. So we wrote this, we finished that, turned it into a song called No More Looking Over My Shoulder, which became my first cut as a staff writer in Nashville. And it was the title track to Travis Tritt's last record on Warner Brothers. And so it was a lesson for me. And the lesson was sort of the great Harlan Howard said it best. He said, country music is three chords and the truth, right? And
Mm-hmm.
trying to write hits is often about chasing trends, you know. But that day with Craig Wiseman, who was clearly a hit writer, he taught me, let's write something real. And so as I moved forward after my first album, the wake of that, that was a great influence on me. I just kept trying to write things that were real to me, without overthinking it.
Did the success of the first album change you in any way?
Sure, lots of ways. Yeah.
Can you share some of that?
Well, I started to have more confidence in my craft. I started having opportunity to have new writers who were coming to town, who were basically what I'd been 4 years prior, coming to town and saying, hey, can you give me some tips? Can you talk to me? Can you help me? Can you encourage me? And because of my background as a speaker, I loved sharing the story about being a hit songwriter for 10 years and not knowing it. Suddenly I was on the road 200 days a year, and I was getting a lot of attention, whether it was events you're at, music business events, or just being around town, or just being in a community somewhere. And, that's a pretty standard kind of an experience for any person to have when they suddenly are in the spotlight. You start to be noticed more. And, you know, um, I again, I was an older artist, so it probably affected me differently than it might somebody in their early 20s. But I felt pretty balanced about all of that, and pretty safe with all of that. I was the guy in my shows that would have my road manager tapping me on the shoulder and saying, "Don't talk so long to the fans. We got to go." Right. So, and I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. I was really interested in sharing a moment with people. I remember I was doing a show in Colorado early on, and it was after the show was over, and there was a line of people waiting to say hello and buy a T-shirt or something, get an autograph. And about I don't know, I'm looking at the line, and maybe 5 or 10 people back there's this woman, and she's just crying. And so I notice her because she's crying, and then you kind of say hello to people, and you move the line forward, and then I realize she's not there. What happened to her? And a woman that was standing next to her said, "Oh, she just went to the bathroom to wipe her tears away." And I said, "Well, why was she crying?" He said, or she said, "She's so excited to meet you." Like that those kinds of things have an impact on you.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me realize, and it actually made me remember when I was in my early 20s and I met a guy who was one of my heroes as an artist and a writer. And I won't say his name because it's sort of an awkward moment, but I got a chance to meet him, and I'm talking to him, and I've got my girlfriend with me, and I'm standing there, I'm talking to him, and he says to me, stops me, kind of puts his hand on my shoulder. He says, "You've asked me that question twice already." And I guess it's because I was so starstruck in that moment, meeting my hero. And he didn't mean it to be mean, but I felt terribly embarrassed. And and I never forgot that. And so when I saw a woman crying in the line, I had a sense that it was important how I treated people,
Mm-hmm.
that it would leave a mark on them. And I think, how did it change me? I think in some sense, change is a big word. You know, change sort of implies transformation. but I think in many ways change is about confirmation. You know, when you start to have an opportunity to have those kinds of experiences, for me anyway, when I did, it just confirmed to me that it was important how people felt, and it was important that I try to be tender, thoughtful, careful, attentive to them when I had a chance to be face to face with them. You know, and so that was a confirmation in a sense, I guess.
Um,
Um,
you still continue to do work with kids and motivational speaking?
well, I haven't really since the pandemic.
Okay, but you also
Yeah,
did work with the military, and
quite a bit.
yeah. So is it just an extension of the work that you did before? Like, how did that come about?
The military thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 9/11 happens. I'm in the YMCA in Franklin, Tennessee, on the treadmill, watching the towers get hit, and feeling, what I felt. And everybody has their own version of that. But something inside of me said that that I should try to do something, which I think is a pretty normal response. I had a buddy of mine who was a big Madison Avenue advertising executive, and the way he said it was when he saw the towers get hit and the wake of that, he said to himself that he needed to do more with his life than just sell French fries.
Hmm.
He wanted to do something more, so he shifted his career. And I kind of had my own version of that. Like, yeah, I gotta do something. So I said to my agent, "Hey, if there's anything I can do to help support the troops, let me know." So I don't know. I said to him, "I don't care if they pay me or not." So in the wake of all of that, he called me one day and said, "Hey, there's a spring formal going to happen at Fort Campbell. About 1,200 service members about to deploy from the 101st Airborne, and they're going to have their dates with them, and they're doing a big spring formal. Would you go down and play some music for them?" So I did, and some nights as a performer are magic. Like, it's just magic. Like, you can't believe everything you say works, everything you play works. It wasn't one of those nights. It was just a good, solid night. I had fun, and when I was done, um, the XO executive officer to the vice chief of staff of the Army came up to me. His name was Xavier, and he said that vice chief of staff of the Army would like to meet you. So he was a four-star general named Dick Cody, and I was excited to meet him just because of a distinguished American, and I'm wanting to do anything I can to support troops. So we have a brief meeting, and as we say goodbye, his executive officer asks me if I have a business card. So I give him a songwriter's business card, which is a bar napkin with a handwritten phone number, you know, and uh, and that's kind of the last of it, I think. And about 2 weeks later, my phone rings, and I think it's a bunch of my friends pulling my leg because they said, "Hi, this is so and so from the Pentagon, and we're calling to see if you want to do something with the Army to make a music video or something." And I thought it was like some of my friends pulling my leg, but I listened, and I soon realized it wasn't a joke. And this guy said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, I don't know. I don't know enough about what I could do. Like, what would you like me to do?" He said, "Well, why don't you fly to D.C. and uh, and I'll have you meet with the Army Field Band, and we'll go from there." So I flew to D.C. I met with the Army Field Band, and the backstory is really the most interesting part of it. There was a colonel that worked as in charge of strategic communications for the Department of the Army, and she had just had a pretty negative experience with a country music artist, where a couple of generals got demoted because
Oh.
the legal stuff hadn't been handled right. So when this showed up on her desk, this napkin with my signature on it and my phone number, and the vice chief of staff of the Army told her to work with me, she was not keen on it. So she threw it literally over her shoulder to one of her contractors, which is the guy who called me. So I'm on my way, But she's sitting in the Pentagon the day of me being on my way, thinking to herself, huh, if my boss, the vice chief, comes to me and says, hey, how did it go with Michael Peterson? And I tell him I blew it off and gave it to a contractor, that's not going to be good. Rats, I better go. So she reluctantly, regretfully gets in her car and drives, hour and a half, 2 hours to get to the fort and is there to greet me as I arrive. And as we finish that day, she takes me back to the Pentagon and introduces me to the chief of staff of the Army. And we have a long meeting with him. And at the end of the day, a couple of days later, she says to me, well, uh, the senior leadership here says we'd like to do more with you. Let me figure out what that looks like. So the beautiful part of the ending of the story is that over the next ever since then, um, I was deeply involved in numerous trips, concerts, hundreds of concerts for veterans, for military families, um, Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, uh, Qatar, all over the Middle East, Africa, Korea, Alaska, countless numbers of trips and concerts. And the colonel, who that day was reluctant to go and didn't want to go, uh, ended up being my wife.
Whoa.
So, that's the beautiful ending of the story is that this woman who was ordered to work with me, we got met, we ended up getting married, and she's my wife, and really her story is phenomenal. She was wounded at the Pentagon on 9/11, had a severe case of post-traumatic stress, but she was a high-ranking, she was full colonel, working for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and really involved in helping people with traumatic brain injuries and with post-traumatic stress. And so when she got out of the Army, she wanted to continue helping people that had post-traumatic stress. And she didn't want to stay in D.C., so she moved to Nashville. And we started working together. I started trying to help her, um, find a way to kind of position her brand, because I had some experience with that, in terms of helping people with post-traumatic stress. And she started helping me with some of the details around my bookings, and we just became really close friends. And almost every trip that I took to the Middle East, she was with me.
Wow.
And we were in a bunch of circumstances where our lives were in danger.
I can imagine.
And there's something about that causes you to start to really trust somebody. So I think it's an unrepeatable set of circumstances that caused us to become close and have that kind of trust. Some of it born from being in traumatic situations in the Middle East. But I can say this: we've been married for almost 13 years now. These have been the happiest years of my life. But a lot of my work with military, it was really just born out of 9/11. Me saying I'll do anything to help support the troops, having a chance to meet Jill opening the door because of who she was in the Pentagon, to say, yeah, we can use you a lot of ways. Let's go do this and let's go do that. And so I just, over time, I just kept saying, yes, I want to do something to try to help.
Oh, that's a fantastic story.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, thank you. And thank you for asking.
as a musician, I mean, obviously you've gone through your ups and downs. You had such success with your first few albums. At one point or another, a major label drops you. How do you
Yeah.
react to that? I mean,
Oh, it was tough.
obviously you've had enough exposure to the business world or business music business that you
Yeah.
knew that things like this happen.
Yeah.
But how did you react to it?
Well, that's a good question. And thank you for asking. I really only had one successful album commercially. My first album sold, I think it's over 1 million copies now. But my second album was launched poor, what didn't do well at the launch. I'll say that, not to point fingers at anybody, it just didn't do well as well. I think it sold about 250,000. records. So didn't suck, but it's not what they were hoping for. And then of course I left that label, and then I ended up at Sony, and then I worked for a couple of years on a record for Sony, and that record was never released. So by the time you know a second record at Warner's that doesn't do well, and then a third record at Sony that doesn't get released, by that time you're 3 or 4 years really away from having had a legit hit record, and it just changes your career because suddenly all of the booking agents that wanted to book you were eager to book you. You don't have a new album coming out. Your price starts dropping. Your opportunities start evaporating, and it was a difficult time. I still had a publishing deal, and I still had some money in the bank, so I was able to navigate that. But it was tough. It was tough to go from being, you know, 1997 and 98. I was a top selling new male artist in all of country music.
Mm-hmm.
I was a top new airplay artist in all of country music. Top new male airplay artist in all of country music in 97, 98. All kinds of award nominations. It wasn't an award nomination I didn't receive that was country related. And anyway, no need to boast, but I'm just saying there was all the spotlight you could hope for that would cause a lot of people to say the next big thing.
Right.
And to go from that to, you don't have a record deal and now you don't have a publishing deal. Like, what happened? Like, so that was a really difficult time for me.
But you continue, and you continue to write.
Well, yeah, I mean, I my last album that I made on a major label was at Sony, and I experienced something there that I'd never experienced before. I experienced being very, very pressured to record songs that I didn't write, that I didn't like.
Hmm.
And that's a conversation for another whole other time. But and then after making what I thought was a fabulous album, um, and doing everything I could to make sure it would be a great success, basically on the whim of an A&R person, my album was never released. And when it wasn't released, then everything else collapsed. Because when you don't have a record coming out, all the talent buyers are like, and he hadn't had one in a long time. Now he's not having a record come out. And your publishers, at that point, I'm nothing but red ink over there. So they can't continue to promote and support me. So I just decided at that point, two things happened. I decided that one thing was that I really believed I had a calling to continue doing what I was supposed to do, what I wanted to do, which was to write and sing and speak. And maybe I thought maybe I can, just make a living as a songwriter, and maybe some people will still want to hear my songs, and maybe I can go back and start speaking to kids again. Maybe I have something to do with that. So that's what I did. I just pointed myself in that direction, and I decided that if I could help it, I was never going to be in a position again where somebody on a whim could take my whole professional life and throw it down the toilet because they had a whim. And I just said, I'm never going to be in that position again if I can help it. And so I didn't pursue getting another record deal. I just thought I'm going to be an independent artist, and I'm going to do that. And, in the years since then to now, I have to go back and look for sure, but I've released 8 to 10 albums. I shouldn't say I've recorded 8 to 10 albums that I sold at my shows. And I did shows, and I did a lot of work with military, and I did a lot of work with students. And I didn't worry too much about trying to get back in some kind of spotlight. I simply just said, I'm on this road. I'm going to follow the green lights, and I'm going to go to those intersections where I think something I have might be of value at that crossroads of somebody else's life. Like there might be somebody I can help or encourage. And I found out that the line for people looking for deals goes around the block. But the line for somebody saying, um, you know, I'd like to help your organization. How can I help you? And not having it be first about money. That's
Hmm.
not very many people in that line, you know? So that's what I did. Again, I'm not meaning to boast about any of that. I'm just saying I went where there was opportunity. And I thought to myself, I have a lot to offer. And there may be organizations that don't realize that I could help them. Let me go try to help some people. And so there was plenty of opportunity with a lot of people that would say, yeah, we'll let you come to work for us for free and see how you can help us, you know? But that led to a lot of great things, and, like it's probably the simplest thing to say is that the last 13, 15 years of my life have been the happiest years of my life. It's been the most fulfilling thing. It's been the most satisfying thing. It's been the most creative time for me. The last 5 years, 6 years has been the most creative, prolific time for me as a songwriter ever. It's been a time of healing for me as a human being, and finally dealing with my dad's suicide and my stepfather's suicide and my dad's murder. To finally having a chance to slow down enough in my life to really grieve those things. Those things can be buried in any of us for a long time. Anyway, I'm probably way too much information, but
Oh no,
um, you
I
know,
really appreciate you sharing that. Has the way you write songs changed?
yeah, it's changed a lot since I got to. We moved to Las Vegas in 2012, November of 2012, and one of the things that I started to notice after a couple of years of being here was my desire to write by myself again. Nashville is so much of Nashville is about co-writing,
Hmm.
and before I ever went to Nashville, I never co-wrote with people. I just wrote by myself. I shouldn't say I never co-wrote. Co-wrote some, but for the most part, I wrote by myself. And of course, being in Las Vegas, I didn't know much about the songwriting community here. I do now. It's changed somewhat, but um, I didn't have a lot of co-writers I was going to call, and I just started writing by myself again. So that's one thing that really changed for me was I started writing a lot more by myself again, and I started realizing that there were lots of wonderful lessons to learn from co-writing, but there was something I had lost by only co-writing.
Hmm.
There was some point of view, some voice that became somewhat less personal, you know. And so I've had a lot of joy from just rediscovering. I still co-write, and I love doing co-writes. And some of my favorite new material is co-written. But I'm also giving myself a lot more room to write by myself. So that's changed. Um, when the pandemic came and everything changed for everybody, I started to really, as things started to open up again, I started to really see that it was possible to try to find and build community here with regards to songwriters. So I started a songwriter small group. I became involved in a thing called the Composers Showcase of Las Vegas, which is an incredible event that happens here monthly, founded by the great Keith Thompson and Philip Fortenberry, that features monthly the cream of the crop of songwriters and composers here in Las Vegas. So I've started to find community here, and I'm really enjoying that.
My final question: what do you look for in writing a song now? What's different about the way you would write now than you did when you were younger?
My perspective, you know, um, I remember reading an article recently. It was written by a journalist, and the journalist was asked, if I recall correctly, was asked something um, by a younger journalist about how do you know if your stuff is any good, and the response from the journalist was something to the effect of, "I've been doing this so long that I don't write anything anymore that's not good. Like I know how to do this,
Right.
right? But occasionally I'll write something that even surprises me, like something that's really good. I don't write anything that's not." at a certain level, because I've been doing this too long to do that, you know. But occasionally you write something that rises above that. And I think, that's kind of my answer to your question is I think what changes is all of your experiences as a writer. They inform, like that old saying about like what you do next is always impacted by what you did before, right? And so all of that I bring all of that to bear now in a new place, a new stage in my life. I'm not wearing a country songwriter hat anymore. I'm wearing a songwriter hat. Like I'm just writing songs, you know. Some of them are country, some of them are not. You know, they're songs that I believe in, that I love, and that's what informs it. And I don't think I write, like that journalist said. I know how to write a song, but I'm looking for those special ones, and I have a perspective now to be able to say, I think that's a special one, and I have 40 years of experience now that informs that opinion.
And the fact that many years later, like it's surprising to me that you started songwriting relatively late. Like you didn't start really early in your life.
Yeah.
And whether it be that Dan Fogelberg album, which is a great album, but the fact that you still love writing and you still have a passion for this
I do.
it's pretty special.
I do. Well, thank you for saying that, because it's funny. I said to my wife the other day, you said, I'm not in pursuit, like the way that I might have been in my 20s. I'm not of a publishing deal and of build a career as a writer. I'm not at that stage. Every day I get up and all I think about is, besides my family and my friends and my health, is like what this new song I'm working on. So anyway, so it's just joy for me, and I'm having a lot of fun doing it. And honestly, I think I'm writing the best songs of my life.
Well, keep at it. It's a real pleasure meeting you.
Oh,
Thank you so
you
much for
too.
doing this.
Thank you so much.
You take care, and I hope that our paths cross sometime.
Me too. And if there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. Oh, can I invite your listeners to visit my website?
Sure.
Yeah. So I have a monthly newsletter that I do, and it's not so much like here I am. It's more like there you are, like that we talked about that earlier. Like, so I try to write about stuff that's just about life in general, about us, and something that if you were reading this, you'd say to yourself, hey, I'm glad I read that. That made me smile and made me feel good. Hey, maybe I'll share that with a friend. So if any of your listeners are interested in that, they can sign up for that. It's free. And they can go to my website, which is michaelpetersonmusic.com. And up in the upper left corner, it says fan club and newsletter. And just sign up. It's for free. I'd love that if they would join me.
Great. Thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
All right. God bless you.